Kalispera σας. Good evening, everyone. Hope you're all well. Allow me to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Welcome to tonight's seminar, which is delivered by Sydney-based Evangelos Demos, and it's entitled The Geopolitics of Greek Foreign Policy, From a Great Idea to Great Ideas. However, before we move to tonight's seminar, just some household items. Next Thursday, the 22nd of May seminar will be by Dean Kalimniou, who will be delivering the Pontian Genocide Memorial Seminar. And the following week, on the 29th of May, we've got a seminar by Rob Nelson on Why Byzantium. So these will be the next two seminars at the mezzanine level. Then for the month of June, we go online with international presenters, a month's winter break, and then we return in August. With respect to tonight's seminar, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Kypros Kyprianou, and I invite you all to become sponsors of a seminar of your choice. There's still quite a few seminars without sponsors so far in the program. Another reminder, there are tickets available for the GCM theatre production, Goals in Crisis, which will be hosted at Doncaster Playhouse Theatre. Due to sellout performances, then putting on an extra session this Sunday as well at 2:30. And yes, it is in Greek, but there are subtitles in English as well with that performance. So, yeah. Now let's return to tonight's topic and welcome our interstate speaker, Evangelos Demos, and his topic, the geopolitics of Greek foreign policy, from a great idea to great ideas. Let me first say a few words about Evangelos. He's in the final year of his PhD, which is being pursued at the University of Sydney, and he's supervised by Professor Vrasidas Karalis, who I know you're all very familiar with Professor Karalis. One of the aims of this series over the years has always been to foster young academic talent and offer them a platform for postgraduate students to showcase their work to a broader audience. So we're quite delightful to have him with us here today. So we wish him the best in this regards, his future research plans. He already has plans afoot, the release of a book based on his PhD in 2026, and the creation of the Demos Institute, which will have both an advisory and lobbying roles, if I'm correct there, Evangelos. Today he's presenting a topic on Greek geopolitics, something rather black and white and clear-cut, don't you reckon? It's an area riddled with minefields, so I'm quite intrigued how he'll be tackling the topic. Greek geopolitics is shaped by its geographical location, historical ties, and complex relationships with neighbouring countries, and its role as a member of the European Union and NATO and various other organisations as well. Greece's strategic position in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Balkans grants it influence in regional affairs and also energy security. However, it also faces challenges relating to maritime disputes, particularly with its neighbour Turkey, and navigating the complexities of international relations in the region. Much of Greece's geopolitical and strategic thinking has been centred around maintaining and defending the Aegean, as it derives significant advantages from controlling and overseeing this space. The geopolitical landscape is constantly evolving, and Greece needs to adapt to new challenges and opportunities, as international relations are never static, constantly evolving and often in unpredictable ways. Enough for me, a big round for our speaker today, Evangelos Demos.
I wanted to begin by saying thank you to Nick, as well as the Greek community of Melbourne and Victoria, as well as the sponsors, for giving me the opportunity to present here tonight at the wonderful Greek Centre. While my PhD focuses on the geopolitics of Greek foreign policy from 1821 until the present day, the purpose of this evening's talk is to focus on an important part of its history. That part is the Megali Idea, or Great Idea, that spans the period from 1821 to 1974. The geopolitics of Greek foreign policy begins in the delicate years prior to the founding of the Greek nation-state in 1832. After the Napoleonic Wars, the great powers of Europe, namely Britain, France, and Russia, were focused on the sick man of Europe, that is, the fast-decaying Ottoman Empire, and the geopolitical repercussions this was having in the region. The dilemma, known as the Eastern Question, posed two ultimatums to the British in its endeavour to maintain its dominance over the region. Either support the Balkan uprisings and bring them under its sphere of influence, or support the short-lived Ottoman Empire and its weak hold over these vast territories. While the British aimed at a balanced approach to prevent Russian expansionism, the Greeks, led by leaders such as Kapodistrias, proved to be the most relentless in their pursuit of liberation from Turkish subjugation and initiated the Greek Revolution in 1821, declaring their independence and the unrecognised Greek state in 1822. Some years later, the great powers ended the Greek Revolution with the Treaty of Constantinople in 1832, which established the Kingdom of Greece that included Rumeli, over here, the Peloponnese, and various Aegean islands. The Treaty of Constantinople was fundamental to Greece as it divided the region geopolitically, although uneasily so, between Greece and the Ottoman Empire, allowing for new allegiances to be formed in a region that had otherwise been under a singular Greek or Turkish Empire. In addition, independent Greece was actually dependent on the three protecting powers at the time, Britain, France, and Russia, each with its own distinct influence in the newfound Greek nation-state. Subsequently, Greek domestic politics, as well as Greek foreign policy, was divided into three factions that aligned with each of these protecting powers. That is, the British Party, French Party, and Russian Party, with Britain holding the greatest sway. Despite the arrangement, the leader of the English Party, Mavrokordatos, noted it was imperative for Greece to align itself geopolitically with Britain as the world's maritime power. The Greeks, as a historical maritime nation, could only rely on the British for protection of their new sovereignty, in particular, the recently acquired Aegean islands in the vital Aegean Sea, which now held strategic importance for both. In contrast, the same could not be said for the Greeks of the French Party or the Russian Party, who held a misplaced faith in Russia and France, namely, as their geopolitical reach did not reach the Aegean Peninsula. In the years to follow, Greece's geopolitical position would be tested by these allegiances. After the establishment of the Kingdom of Greece, the geopolitical position of the country again remained aligned with the protecting powers, tilting even more so towards Britain due to its continued dominance over the region. With the onset of the Crimean War, part of the larger Eastern Question, Greeks from the Russian Party and those sympathetic to their Orthodox kin supported Russia, while others, seeking to take advantage of the situation, attempted their own liberations in Epirus and Macedonia in 1854. In both instances, Britain quashed Greek hopes at any advances against the Ottomans so as to ensure it maintained the integrity of the Ottoman Empire to halt a Russian advance against the Straits, and even blockaded Greece in 1854 to prevent a Greek attack against the Turks. Despite the reluctance of Prime Minister Mavrokordatos to make advances in these regions, there were elements in Greece that challenged the pro-Britain stance, namely Koletis of the French Party, that loosely reintroduced the great idea into Greek politics, that is, the expansion of Greece to include all Greeks living outside its borders. In an effort to keep Greece on side, and after lengthy negotiations, Britain and Greece agreed to terms in the Treaty of London, and on the 27th of March 1864, Greece was awarded the Ionian Islands. The Treaty of London was a hallmark moment for Greece, as it demonstrated that by geopolitically aligning with Britain, the maritime power of the region, it too could reap the benefits. By successfully engaging Britain through diplomatic means, Greece conceded to its place under the British sphere of influence, as this brought with it both protection and assistance in achieving its own foreign policy goals. Despite agitations from France and Russia, Britain consolidated Greek hopes for turning the great idea into a reality, and by acquiring the Ionian Islands, this was considered its first victory. The Ionian Islands were not merely significant to Greece due to the Greek populations they held, but rather as they provided the small Greek state with a geopolitical advantage against its much larger Ottoman and Italian neighbours. While the Ionian Islands no longer held a strategic importance to Britain, their acquisition bridged the Aegean Sea with the Ionian Sea and enhanced Greece's tactical ability to respond to threats coming from the west. Neither France nor Russia could offer the same assurances as Britain in this regard, while Italy, a not so unfamiliar threat, now faced Greek islands in close proximity to the Italian coast. Nonetheless, this did not prevent further divisions in Greek domestic politics that still attempted to alter Greece's geopolitical position. With the rise of Russia's pan-Slavism that replaced pan-Orthodoxy and Germany's pan-Germanism, Greece's geopolitical position had no choice but to remain pro-British in the face of Slavic, Germanic, and Turkish threats. From approximately 1867, the Russians initiated a brutal guerrilla war between the Greeks, Bulgarians, and Turks throughout Epirus, Macedonia, and even as far south as Thessaly in an attempt to fracture the region. While Greece under Prime Minister Trikoupis tacitly supported Greek irregulars that crossed its borders into the Ottoman Empire to counter the Bulgarians, as well as Greek irregulars also engaged in an uprising in Crete, the onset of the Russian-Turkish War of 1877 changed matters. Greece, under pressure from Britain, and taking into account its own cordial relations with the Ottoman Empire at the time, remained neutral until such a time that the Russians had advanced to the outskirts of Constantinople. With peace later established in the Convention of Constantinople, Greece, with Britain's support, was awarded Thessaly and a part of Epirus on the 2nd of July, 1881. In return, Greece agreed to assist Britain in selling the idea of British control over Cyprus to its majority Greek population. The Convention of Constantinople sealed Greece's geopolitical fate once again with Britain, namely in its ability to maintain the British status quo over the region. Under Britain's sphere of influence, Greece utilised a diplomatic and military strategy that prevented any territorial concessions to either Bulgaria or the Ottoman Empire, while Greece was given the unofficial mandate to pursue its own advances. In addition, Britain enabled Greece to successfully pursue the great idea for the second time, and gaining Thessaly was Greece's third territorial expansion since 1864. The acquisition of Thessaly was another fundamental step in extending Greece's geopolitical base in the Aegean, not merely due to its Greek population, but as the region provided mountainous Greece with what it was lacking, an agricultural base. The purpose of the Greek-British partnership did keep Macedonia and Thrace under the sovereignty of the fast-decaying Ottoman Empire, which was a far easier state for Britain to hold influence over, but whom Greece reserved the right to target at a later stage. That could not have been achieved if Bulgaria or Russia, as well as the German and Austro-Hungarian Empire, stretched beyond their natural borders and gained access to the Aegean either via Thrace the Straits, or Thessaloniki. The fruitful relationship between Greece and Britain, however, would be tested. Less than 20 years later, Greece's geopolitical position in favour of Britain was somewhat fractured, as the British chose not to support the Greeks being viciously targeted by Russia's reignited pan-Slavism in the Ottoman Empire. From 1896 to 1904, Russia supported the Bulgarians in their guerrilla war against the Turks and sporadic attacks against the Greeks of the region with the hope of realising a greater Bulgaria. The Greeks, led by the likes of Melas and Dragoumis, responded to the Bulgarian challenge with their own guerrilla war, while the Greeks in Crete, led by Eleftherios Venizelos, took advantage of the situation and initiated their own revolt against the Turks with the primary goal of union with Greece. Enraged that Britain still showed little support for the Greek causes, Greek Prime Minister Viligiannis preemptively declared war on the Ottoman Empire on the 18th of April 1897, thus initiating a new Greek-Turkish war. In what lasted 30 days, the war was a complete and utter failure for Greece. It quickly ended in defeat and the subsequent Treaty of Constantinople of 1897, whereby Greece had to surrender a small part of its territory in Thessaly to the Ottomans. The Treaty of Constantinople caused a severe geopolitical rift between Greece and Britain, and demonstrated the harsh reality that if Britain's hold over the region was put at risk, British interests superseded those even of its allies, and the Greeks were not exempt from this. Despite this, Britain still opted for a diplomatic resolution and provided Greece with concessions to guarantee the longevity of their partnership. In this case, ensuring Greek territorial losses were minimal in Thessaly and forcing the Ottomans to establish an autonomous Cretan state. For the third time, Britain conceded to Greek ambitions, although hesitantly, with Greece presenting minor changes in Thessaly as an acceptable loss in exchange for a half victory in realising the great idea in Crete. The events of the Black 97, as the war became known, paved the way for the Greeks to gain autonomy in Crete, the largest island of the Aegean. In this case, the Greek-British partnership, despite the strain posed by the situation, consolidated the Greek hold over half of the Aegean with their unofficial administration of Crete, while preventing the Ottomans from taking additional territory beyond Thessaly and even as far south as Athens. Further up north, the British turned a blind eye to Greece's tacit support of Greek uprisings in Macedonia, as they were a necessary proxy to halt the determined Bulgarians and Russians from usurping Thessaloniki under the banner of Pan-Slavism and gaining an exit to the Aegean they were very desperate for. Greek politics, however, did not recover from the defeat of 1897, and after 12 years of political instability and further revolts, the Greek army initiated a coup that overthrew the Greek government in search of a strong leader and statesman. In 1910, Eleftherios Venizelos became the Prime Minister of Greece, and after 3 years of hard preparations, declared war on the Ottoman Empire in what was the Balkan Wars, attacking the Ottomans from Thessaly and the Aegean. From the onset, Greece, along with its allies Serbia, Montenegro, and Bulgaria, who Venizelos had achieved separate alliances with, successfully defeated the Ottomans on all fronts, while the former three defeated Bulgaria after it turned on its partners as a result of its own poor territorial gains. In the ensuing peace talks held in London, Britain played a leading role to ensure there would be stability in the region by supporting the new territorial borders that were drawn from the Ottoman Empire's European holdings. It is also in these talks that Britain witnessed firsthand Venizelos' diplomacy and were more than impressed, with Lloyd George and Winston Churchill discussing in secret negotiations a possible Anglo-Greek alliance that sought the collaboration of their navies in the Aegean under Britain's guardianship. At the conclusion of negotiations, Venizelos' charisma and persuasiveness gained Greece the lion's share of the spoils, being awarded Epirus, Macedonia, Crete, and a vast number of Aegean islands. In the treaties of 1913 that were fundamental for both Greece and Britain geopolitically, these demonstrated that their unified alignment and cooperation in securing Britain's support and hold over the region against its greatest threat, Russia. Under the British sphere of influence, Venizelos also restored the valour of the Greeks after the Black 97, almost completely pushing the Ottomans out of Europe and gaining a large sway of territory in the process. Venizelos' diplomatic and military finesse as a statesman in executing Greek foreign policy doubled Greece's territories and population, bringing the great idea closer to realisation than any other Greek ever had, in what was its third and largest victory. Venizelos' gains, however, were to ensure Greece controlled the entire Aegean, hence his orders for the Greek navy to establish strong footholds over the strategic Imbros and Tenedos islands close to the Dardanelles, as well as over Lesbos, Chios and Samos adjacent to Asia Minor and near Smyrna in particular, and finally over Crete, the link to the eastern Mediterranean. In addition, Venizelos ordered the Greek army to capture as much of Epirus as possible, capturing Ioannina, the link to the Ionian Sea, as well as Macedonia, and more importantly, Thessaloniki, the gateway to the Balkans and Central Europe from the Aegean. However, Italy again presented itself as a challenger to Greece, this time in northern Epirus and the Dodecanese Islands, protesting that the former go to Albania to prevent the Greeks from controlling both sides of the Corfu Straits, and demanding that the latter be taken by Italy to secure its own place in the Aegean. Nevertheless, Venizelos was hailed as ethnarch, or father of the Greek nation, for the achievement. Almost immediately after the Balkan Wars, and after successfully quashing the national schism at home, Venizelos joined the Allies towards the end of World War I. And in the Paris peace talks that followed, Greece deliberated and made numerous proposals in their redrawing of the region. In their discussions, the Ottoman Empire ceased to exist, and the new Turkey was reduced to central Anatolia, with the remainder of Asia Minor divided between Greece, Britain, France, Italy, and Armenia, which was also awarded Pontus, given its distance from the Greek mainland. Constantinople and the Straits were mainly occupied by Britain and France, although there were smaller contingencies from Italy and Greece, all of whom agreed on its new international status that removed the Turkish hold over the Straits and its presence as a threat in the region. In a groundbreaking deal, Greece and Italy also agreed to support each other, with Italy supporting Greek claims over northern Epirus and the Dodecanese Islands, and Greece supporting Italian claims over the remainder of Albania and parts of Asia Minor. In what was truly an epic war of words, Venizelos' finest diplomatic hour came with the Treaty of Sevres in 1920 that saw Greece awarded Western Thrace, Eastern Thrace, all the Aegean Islands, northern Epirus, as well as permission to establish a Greek zone in Asia Minor around Smyrna. The Treaty of Sevres was, to date, the most important geopolitical agreement of the 20th century for Greece, as well as Britain, as it put into practice the Anglo-Greek alliance discussed but a few years earlier that secured the region under Britain, with Greece playing a leading role in the new arrangement. Under the British sphere of influence, Greece, for the second time with Venizelos, gained additional territories that secured a Greek foothold in Asia Minor control of eastern Thrace, and the destruction of its greatest rival, the Ottoman Empire. Once again, Venizelos had proved himself to be a formidable statesman, convincing the great powers, through persistent and secretive diplomacy, to hold Greece at a high standing that saw the great idea almost completely realised, lest Constantinople in what was its fourth victory. Venizelos' accomplishments with the Treaty of Severus were to first and foremost secure by treaty all the Aegean islands under Greek sovereignty, including two of the most important, Imbros and Tenedos, so that it alone could command the Aegean Sea and control passage through the Dardanelles. Furthermore, Venizelos was adamant that Greece's holdings over eastern Thrace did not include Constantinople, as it was far better, strategically, for the Greeks to be within firing range of the city, 60 kilometres in this case, and use this as a means to exert influence over the now international city. Finally, by gaining a foothold in Asia Minor via the Smyrna zone, Venizelos saw this as an opportunity to secure Hellenism in the east by encouraging the remaining Greeks of Anatolia, persecuted for years as part of Turkey's Greek genocide, to relocate in the only safe area under Greek administration. Celebrations, however, were short-lived when Venizelos lost the Greek elections of 1920 that led to a change in government where King Constantine I and the new Greek Prime Minister, Gounaris, reversed all of Venizelos' efforts, severing the Greek-British alliance and abruptly starting a new Greek-Turkish war that Greece, now without allies, lost at a great cost. In what is known as the Asia Minor catastrophe, the Greek army, embarrassed by the situation, overthrew King Constantine and Gounaris and called on Venizelos again to represent Greece in re-establishing its pro-Britain alignment over the region and in negotiating the harsh peace talks that followed its defeat in war. In an effort to secure a long-lasting peace, Britain no longer supported Greek claims to Asia Minor and cautioned against any new Greek claims in Cyprus. Italy, who had a history of antagonism towards Greek expansion in the pursuit of its own goals, renounced its previous agreement with Greece and withdrew all support of Greek claims to northern Epirus and the Dodecanese Islands, including Rhodes. Turkey, for its part, wanted the Greeks out of eastern Thrace, and as we see today, from half of the Aegean Islands, most notably those in close proximity to Asia Minor, as well as Imbros and Tenedos. Under these conditions, Greece surrendered all territories gained from the Treaty of Severus and signed the Treaty of Lausanne on the 24th of July 1923, retaining Western Thrace and some Aegean islands, with the exception of Imbros, Tenedos, and the Dodecanesa. The Treaty of Lausanne is the most fundamental agreement between the great powers, as it established a new British status quo over the region where neither Greece nor Turkey were favoured. Rather, they were treated as distinct but equal subordinates in this geopolitically fragile region. Under the firm hand now of Britain, peace had been established between two rivals, with a new Greek-Turkish border drawn and territorial matters resolved, while Britain retained free passage through the Straits, Aegean, and onwards towards the eastern Mediterranean unhindered. The loss of these vast territories was the greatest failure of Greek foreign policy in its 100-year pursuit of the great idea, because it was the second time Greece had to surrender reclaimed territory since 1897, and a large amount of territory at that. While Venizelos accepted the terms of the negotiations, it was his international reputation that ensured Greece retain control of the Aegean. even at the expense of other territories, as this was the only means of the country's survival. Venizelos' achievement in this regard was done by keeping a majority of the Aegean islands, enabling Greece to defend against the now Turkish Straits, Italian-ruled Dodecanese Islands, and against Bulgaria or Turkey from western Thrace. Interestingly, a month after Lausanne, Italy again challenged Greece, this time by bombarding and briefly occupying Corfu, given its strategic position at the entrance of the Adriatic Sea, although this was short-lived and the status quo reintroduced. With political instability continuing in Greece, Venizelos made the decision to return to Greek politics. Venizelos returned to Greece as Prime Minister in 1928 and sought to realign Greece with Britain over the region, although from a far more withdrawn position. After the chaos of World War I, the great powers insisted on the new status quo they had established, that is, security and stability in the region, the territorial integrity of borders, and respect for sovereignty. In a further attempt to demonstrate their neutrality on Greek-Turkish affairs, none of the great powers, including Britain, formed any new alliances with either side, as this usually came with demands of territorial advances against the other. The great powers also strongly discouraged Greece and Turkey from supporting any agitations by Greeks or Turks living outside of their borders, as this would risk a new confrontation and further damage their diplomatic relations abroad. Venizelos thus proclaimed, although indirectly, the official end of the great idea when he stated, "The struggle between Greece and Turkey, let us call it a trial, has lasted 7 centuries. Now a final verdict has been issued, the Treaty of Lausanne. The treaty has definitely settled the territorial issue between the two countries. Indeed, Turkey has ceased to be an empire in order to become a nation-state, while Greece has completed her national unification." Venizelos' statements indicate he knew very well it was important that Greece deter itself from the great idea to recover from the years of war and geopolitically align itself with Britain that continued to dominate the region. While it is difficult to believe Venizelos had abandoned the great idea, despite dedicating his entire statesmanship to its realization, Greece was in no position to jeopardize its delicate relations with Britain, Turkey, or Italy. Venizelos thus redirected Greek foreign policy to regain the respect of Britain and the great powers, while seeking new ways to guarantee the rights of Greeks outside of Greece's borders. Despite his previous success, Venizelos was firmly against any new Greek territorial claims in regions where Greeks remained subjugated, for the simple reason that Greece did not have the strong allies it once boasted, nor the military capability to act upon them. Venizelos had to tread carefully, particularly with Britain, Turkey, and Italy, as any deviation from the status quo would have put Greece in another predicament with the real threat of losing more territory. Venizelos' approachment through the peaceful settlement of disputes and friendly relations was the only way in which Greece could assist the Greeks of northern Epirus, the Dodecanese Islands, and Cyprus at the time, rather than through further revolts. After further internal political turmoil, Venizelos left Greece in 1935, passing away the following year in Paris. And despite one's own personal political views on the man, he is remembered as Greece's most distinguished leader, statesman, and embodiment of the great idea. A few years later, on the 28th of October 1941, Greece found itself plunged into World War II, after Prime Minister Metaxas famously replied that it is war, or ochi, to an Italian ultimatum to surrender Greek territory or face an attack, a move that instantly secured Greece's place amongst the Allied powers in defence of the region. Within hours, the Italians attacked Greece, but quickly saw defeat at the hands of the Greeks, who both withstood their offensive manoeuvres and counter-attacked the Italians deep into the mountains of northern Epirus. Once the Germans were informed of the Italian embarrassment, they quickly invaded Greece and saw some of the fiercest resistance in both Macedonia and Crete, while the Greeks and allies inflicted mass casualties. Nevertheless, within 2 months, Greece had fallen under the Axis occupation, and for the first time, half of the region was under the control of Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Bulgaria. And to put that into perspective, France, considered a great power at the time, fell to the Nazis in 2 weeks. After years of bloody warfare, the Allied powers defeated the Axis powers, and in the post-World War II Treaty of Paris, Greece was awarded the Dodekanesar Islands on the 10th of February 1947. The Treaty of Paris was fundamental for all of Europe, as well as the Allied powers, as they redrew geopolitical alignments, with Greece again placed under that of Britain, who reasserted itself in the region, although with strong US support. While Britain was unable to protect Greece from the Axis powers in the initial stages of the war, its persistence in the British sphere of influence led to a significant outcome, that is, removing the Italian hold in the Aegean. Despite also claiming northern Epirus and northern Thrace, regions that were denied after fierce Italian and Russian opposition, Greek foreign policy saw Greece the master and commander of the Aegean, ironically fulfilling another aspect of the dormant great idea that revealed itself in a moment of opportunity. The Greek hold over the Aegean cannot be overstated and is fundamental for 2 important reasons. First, the Aegean Islands enabled Greece to hold the advantage over vital strategic points in close proximity to the Straits, Asia Minor, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Second, by dominating the Aegean Sea, Greece, in essence, controlled the trade routes that passed through its waters, that is, from Thessaloniki to the Balkans, the Straits to the Black Sea, and Mediterranean Sea to the Suez Canal. After many turbulent years, Greece's borders as we know them today were finally fixed, and in what can be described as a changing of the guard, Britain gracefully withdrew itself from the region for a new power to take the reins. Following World War II, Greece's geopolitical position was now firmly aligned with the United States, the world power that had replaced Britain as the guardian over the region. The US, now in a role that sought to rearrange the new security order in post-World War II Europe, formed a very important military alliance in 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. The sole purpose of NATO was the collective security and defense of its members against the enormous threat they now faced from the USSR or Russia and its communist allies in the Cold War. Led by the US, the deterrence of NATO was enshrined in its charter, that an attack on one of its members was an attack on all that would be fiercely met with a unified response. Greece, under Prime Minister Papagos, joined NATO in 1952, with Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Sophocles Venizelos, son of the late Eleftherios Venizelos, leading the effort to preserve his father's newfound vision. NATO membership reaffirmed what Venizelos had sought in 1930, that is, Greece's geopolitical alignment to the dominant power of the region for both protection and a long-lasting peace. Under the US sphere of influence, Greece had assurances from NATO that both its political stability and external security would be guaranteed from the fast encroaching enemy that was the USSR and communism. NATO membership also ruled out, at the official level at least, Greek foreign policy from supporting agitations by the Greeks in northern Epirus and Cyprus. The former are part of Albania, an ally of the USSR, and the latter under that of Britain, a NATO and historical ally. Greece was able to join NATO fairly quickly to keep Greek territory firmly in the camp of the West due to the strategic importance the Aegean held. In addition, NATO membership protected Greece from the triple threats to the north, that is, the communist states of Albania, Yugoslavia, and Bulgaria. With Greece's inclusion, NATO confined the USSR to the Black Sea and halted its expansion to the Aegean Sea that would have given it influence over the Straits and Eastern Mediterranean. What NATO could not prevent, however, was disputes from arising between its members in neutral territory, namely Cyprus. Despite Greece's NATO membership, the dilemmas in Cyprus between the Greeks, Turks, and British caused friction amongst NATO members and risked an all-out war between the three. After Britain refused to recognise the continuous calls for union with Greece by Greek Cypriots, even ignoring the results of a referendum for unification, matters turned for the worse for NATO allies Greece, Britain, and Turkey. The Greeks, led by Colonel Grivas and his National Organisation of Cypriot Fighters, initiated a guerrilla war in 1955 against the British, as well as combatants from the Turkish minority, in what they declared the Greek Cypriot War of Independence. The conflict was a complete and utter blow to NATO, given it was meant to quash any future conflicts between its members, particularly Greece and Turkey, due to their historical enmity. As a result of NATO intervention, an independent Republic of Cyprus was agreed to in the Treaty of Guarantee of 1960, with Greece, Turkey, and Britain pledging to prohibit any future activities at union or petition. The Treaty of Guarantee was fundamental for the US in ensuring all three of its allies, Britain, Greece, and Turkey, settled their differences and remained geopolitically aligned with its dominance over the region. This was particularly important for both Greece and Turkey, both of whom relied on the US for their security purposes and were not going to risk any deviations that ousted them from the US sphere of influence and left their territories open to aggression from the USSR. In what was a delicate peace, the treaty may have satisfied the US and Britain, but was unsuccessful from quashing Greek Cypriot hopes for union with Greece, which remained a secret Greek and Cypriot foreign policy goal. Despite the persistence of Greek Cypriots, the declaration of an independent Cyprus was a quick US resolution to avoid an all-out war between allies Greece and Turkey in NATO's southeastern flank. Even if Turkey was not a factor, the US would have had far greater concerns of a potential Greek Cypriot and British war, a far more dangerous conflict in the region, particularly as Britain still had a vested interest in Cyprus, given its strategic proximity to the Near East. What is often overlooked is that the Republic of Cyprus was dominated by the Greek Cypriot majority, and with political independence from Britain, the declaration was also a half victory for the dormant great idea that gifted Greece and the Greek Cypriots with a newfound strategic position, that is, the ability to now flank Turkey from the Eastern Mediterranean. However, 7 years later, the Greeks awoke to a significant change in their own country's political system. On the 21st of April 1967, the Greek army overthrew the Greek government and established a military dictatorship that was vehemently pro-US in its support of its dominance over the region. Despite the ultra-nationalist ideology and tendencies of the dictatorship, the US continued to support Greece in preparing for a confrontation with the USSR, real or not, and to prevent the election of any left-wing governments in Greece. Quite interestingly, so long as the dictatorship guaranteed that Greece would serve NATO's overall defence interests, the US tolerated the regime. Misinterpreting US support as a safety net against any Greek foe, the dictatorship redirected Greek foreign policy towards Greek claims in Cyprus. On the 15th of July, 1974, the Greek dictatorship instigated a military coup in Cyprus, overthrowing the Makarios government with one that supported Cyprus's union with Greece, a move which quickly prompted a Turkish invasion days later. The coup and subsequent Turkish invasion confirmed US fears that in an instance, the entire region could erupt in an all-out war if Greece or Turkey's geopolitical alignments shifted. Rather than cooperating on the military threats faced by the USSR, again, either real or perceived, which took satisfaction in NATO's internal conflict, Greece and Turkey opted for rogue actions in the US sphere of influence. For Greece in particular, this proved that unlike Britain, the US or NATO had no interest in supporting a Greek foreign policy aimed at territorial claims, particularly if this threatened the US balance of power in the Aegean or region as a whole. Despite the lone wolf maneuver, the dictatorship's political and tactical success in the coup gave it a real sense that after years of Greek Cypriot revolts, the strategic island of Cyprus would finally be a part of Greece. More importantly, the dictatorship was convinced that it had successfully projected Greek power abroad and achieved a bridge between the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean with Cyprus as its anchor. However, the coup was a diplomatic and military failure as it did not prepare for its allies' neutrality and abandonment in the situation, or Turkey's military response that not only threatened all of Cyprus, all of Greek Cypriots, but also a spillover in the Aegean. 9 days after the coup, the Greek dictatorship collapsed, and Konstantinos Karamanlis was summoned from self-exile to return to Greece and initiate a new era, the metapolitevsi, or regime change back to democracy. The story of this talk, however, does not end here, as in my additional research delves into the history of great ideas, a play on words that analyses Greek foreign policy from Karamanlis to Papandreou right up to Tsipras, analysing their geopolitical decisions, good and bad. That is, however, for another time. Thank you.
Evangelos, thank you for that presentation. Look, there are many milestones that you covered there. You could almost present a separate seminar on each of those, but I might just kickstart off the questioning. Something that you didn't mention, well, 20 years of history, there's many things you didn't mention. Can you just elaborate a bit, I think it was 1915, during World War I, where there was an offer by the British to offer Greece to Cyprus if they took the side of the Allies. Can you sort of elaborate on that? What you, at least when it comes to your readings, what's your understanding of that period and that offer?
My understanding of that is there were a lot of... I deliberately left that out because it's part of what's referred to as the national schism between Greece's domestic politics between Venizelos and the Royalists. And the Germans were trying to get the Greeks to remain neutral, while the British were trying to get them to join them on their side. And a lot of offerings were made, including the offer of Cyprus. Now, my understanding is that even though it was offered, nothing came of it. my understanding is that when it was brought up in the post-war treaties that were discussed, the British said no.
So you're saying it's probably more hearsay rather than an actual concrete offer?
From my understanding, it was hearsay. Like a lot of these discussions in the post-war war treaties, they will mention specific territories, and Cyprus wasn't mentioned. It was more of a taboo subject for the British, because they knew if it did come up, obviously, after years of Greek attempts, the Greeks wanted it, and they didn't want those troubles that occurred later on. So,
yeah. Okay, thank you. Any questions from the audience? You're usually an inquisitive lot, and
getting back to the heart of the big idea in terms of the intrusion into the invasion, if you like, into deep Turkish territory. Now, it's been said by, I forget the name of the gentleman, but he's a lecturer in the military school of Athens, I think, that the aim of the British was to, in fact, use Kemal's interest in the oil reserves in Mosul in Iraq, I think, and essentially they drew the Greeks promising support deep into Asia Minor up until Kemal came to an understanding about relinquishing, is it Mosul? And after which, the Greeks were abandoned. And then, after the Lausanne Treaty, when Kemal became interested in attacking Mosul again, then the British actually used the leverage of the then Prime Minister, I forget who it is, and had him talk openly about invading Turkey again. Any comments on that? I mean, it seems the gentleman is quoting Turkish historical sources. Have you come to the depths of that?
very vaguely on that specific part of the region. Look, the British and the French obviously had, if you look at maps of Lausanne, they have their interests drawn up, but in specific reference to Asia Minor, when these kinds of things were brought up between Venizelos and the British and the French, he knew better than to fall for that British trap of... His successor didn't, no. When Constantine returned after the failed elections for Venizelos, he wanted to present Greece as triumphant, and he basically went all in, and we suffered for it dearly.
And oil was, that particular oil field was one of the biggest ever at that time, and was projecting to be, a major source of the up-and-coming vehicle industry. So it was very important for the British to be involved.
No, it would be. Look, if you look at maps of where the Royalists went, as far as I could see, and from what the literature says, their intent was to, again, Constantine wanted to be a triumphant king of the Greeks, even though the royal family were not Greeks by descent. But he wanted to sack Ankara and basically claim that he was the one that actually removed the Turks from Asia Minor, not Venizelos.
And I also heard that one of their major military aims was to kill Kemal first.
That was, but yeah, it wasn't going to be realised, I don't think, at the time. Because the problem with the royalist officers that replaced all the Venizelos officers that were kicked out of Asia Minor is that they had no experience in war. I mean, the soldiers that were there had 10 plus years of experience fighting the Turks, and the royalists didn't, and hence the defeat.
Any further questions? Any further questions from the audience?
Look, I must thank you immensely as a Xeno in his own country for a wonderful description of things I never knew. And it was so crystal clear that, I'd just love to have a copy someday. What struck me was that the two occasions where the great idea was defeated seemed to be due to internal disturbances in Greece, the overthrow of Venizelos, and later on the coup. And it just seems to show the importance of national unity, which has always been a challenge for Greece, in maintaining the geopolitical structure.
No, that's very true. And in addition to that, the two areas where we suffered defeat was when we removed ourselves from supporting or aligning ourselves with Britain. In the War of 1897, the Greek Prime Minister was pro-Russian, was encouraged by Russia, and the British said, okay, they did that, and they withdrew support, and we lost in 30 days. And then again, after the Venizelos was kicked out, as we know, the British withdrew all forms of support, military, logistic, economic, and we were basically fighting a ferocious army on our own.
Thank you so much, and I hope you come back again to to continue from where you left off. I mean, yeah, like I could go on forever about that question, but I will ask you about Cyprus. And as far as I know, the Greek junta was supported by the US, by the CIA, and they encouraged them to go into Cyprus, promising them that they would give it to them. And then when they did, the US, of course, did not honor their word. As Ioannidis said, προδοθήκαμε, μας προδώσανε, κάτι τέτοιο, δεν το θυμάμαι τώρα. But these are the conversations that were, I mean, they are recorded. I mean, you can go back and listen to them. So it wasn't as if they just went crazy one day and wanted to go into Cyprus and, you know what I mean? It was something that they were encouraged to do in order to give Turkey the excuse to take over half of Cyprus, something that was planned a long time ago. I mean, the English never forgave the Cypriots for EOKA, and that is part of what, you know, a payback, you know what I mean? So it's not as if the US and the English didn't have anything to do with it. They were right behind it, they were in it, and they made sure that they took what they wanted. And it will always be like that unless they decide that that's going to change.
Look, thank you for the comment. That is interesting. Look, when it comes to Cyprus, it's a very delicate topic. And what you're saying, I have read that the CIA were very heavily involved in supporting the junta.
Clinton came and asked us forgiveness. He came to Greece and he asked the Greek parliament for forgiveness of what they did during that era. And then Stephanopoulos said to him, but what about Cyprus?
Yeah, and
what about Cyprus? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're asking for forgiveness, but then, you know, we've lost half of the area.
We have, and this comes back to the big picture of how America does things and its view on the balance of power. America doesn't want just a Greek Cyprus or just a Turkish Cyprus because of the importance of the island in the Near East and the importance of, for example, if, like I mentioned, if Greece controlled it, we would flank Turkey from the Eastern Mediterranean. They don't want that. It'll upset things, and vice versa. So, I have no doubts that they were involved and they were playing both sides to keep their own interests in accordance with, their own policy.
Any further questions from the audience? Okay. Oh.
Thank you for the lecture. the exchange of the populations in 1933, it's not a sign of Venizelos' acceptance of the end of Megali Idea.
In that part of the world, maybe. You could argue that. Other parts, no. Because, I mean, you still got the Greeks in Cyprus who were unliberated, Greeks in northern Epirus, unliberated. At the time, we had the Italians controlling the Dodecanesa Islands. So I guess this is one of those things when you read about Venizelos and the great idea, he was, as I mentioned, the embodiment of the idea, but it did predate him and it did continue after him, even though they were minor events. But I don't think it died with him at that point in time, despite the population exchange.
And you mentioned about the great ideas in plural. Has that great idea now fragmented to other little bits of potential points of expansion?
So when I refer to great ideas, it looks at the second part of the history and then the contemporary. So as I mentioned, it's a play on words. So when I say great ideas, I look at, I mean, you'll see Karamanlis saying our new great idea for Greece is to join the EU. And we did. Things like that. Or another great, this is why there's a question mark in my thesis title, because it depends on who you ask. Other areas, when Cyprus rejected the Annan Plan, was that a good thing or a bad thing? So it depends on who you ask. But in my contemporary studies, I do look at issues in the Aegean, as Nick mentioned, issues in Cyprus. I look at the Greek minority in northern Epirus. I look at the Greeks of Imbros and Tenedos. I look at the ecumenical patriarchate. I've identified 8 areas or 8 fronts that I call them where we're threatened as a people, territorially or where our kin live, and that's in my contemporary research.
I think he's just setting himself up for a return invitation. So big round of applause for our speaker tonight.
Thank you.
Evangelos, just a bottle of wine from the community.
Oh, thank you.
And hope to see you all next week when Dean Kalimniou is presenting. Thank you.
What's next week?
The Pontian Genocide Memorial Seminar by Dean Kalimniou.